Managers, what is the stupidest thing an employee did that forced you to fire them? Not me, but my boss. Boss had to fire a lady in our office because she lost her marbles when someone ate her bagel from the fridge. She literally had a tantrum like a toddler. Also, the girl who ate it by mistake. She thought it was a bagel from the office breakfast we had earlier that same morning. It was in the same packaging as the office stuff. Now, I absolutely hate it when people eat my lunch, but the girl who ate the bagel profusely apologized, even stated she would go out and buy her a new one right on the spot, but Tantrum Lady just couldn't let it go. So that ended up being her last night. Did they offer her a severance package, maybe a bagel? Story 2. Back in my days working at a used car dealership, we had a teen come in and test drive a 1,500-mile Corvette. Today's equivalent would be the ZR1. Anyway, the kid drives it around our set loop once and is being a little waffly on if he wants to get it or not. He says it doesn't really drive as well as he thought it would. My salesman told him it was a user error and he'd prove it to him. They went out for another loop around with the employee driving it. He managed to get pulled over doing 135 miles per hour in a school zone and got arrested, if I recall correctly. Needless to say, he was not welcome back at our store. However, the team did buy the car. Story 3. We kept finding stock discrepancies. We couldn't figure out for a while what was happening. The count on certain items was out. The system said we had stuff that wasn't on the shelf. Eventually found out that when a customer bought something with cash later that same day, the same cashier would refund the transaction for cash with no customer around. They were fired on the spot but couldn't be charged criminally because the way the camera sat, they'd been able to block the view of the cash drawer with their body and you couldn't actually see them take the money out of the till. Even though we knew exactly when the false transactions were posted, footage placed them right there doing something and intentionally blocking the view at that exact time. There's only one way everything added up, but they still got away with it. If they'd just been pulling cash out, we would have caught it right away, but the counts were never out because there was a transaction in the system. So they'd been doing this occasionally for a couple of months. We figured they'd gotten away with a couple of grand. Return procedures changed after that. Quite a few have pointed out we probably could have charged the person. There were 2 problems. First, the police weren't much interested in chasing someone for only a couple of grand. So we would need to do all the work, which meant sifting through months' worth of paperwork to nail them to the wall. Second was management and HR just wanted the whole thing to go away. Regarding our return procedures, before that, the cashiers were trusted to run their own returns. Afterwards, they needed to get authorization from one of the supervisors. Pain in the back, but it didn't happen again. Story 4. My college town hamburger joint gets busy as heck on the weekends. We had a 5-man crew on a Saturday night, and about an hour and a half into service, I noticed my fry boy was taking a long time bringing back frozen appetizers from the cooler. I leave Expo in a huff and stomp to the back to yell at him, throwing open the walk-in door. This short Irish leprechaun-looking idiot is getting whistled by the new dish girl, owner's friend's barely legal daughter. Fired him after the dinner rush. Story 5. Hired a girl to work in a bagel store who, on her first day, told me she couldn't touch any of the meats because she was vegan. Had another guy show up for work his first day, was doing just fine, seemed to be good with the job. I went to the office to get some paperwork for him to fill out, and he was just gone. Never came back, didn't steal anything, no explanation at all. The bad one had to fire a girl for not showing up for several days in a row and saw in a newspaper the next week that she had been in jail the whole time because she had locked her kids in a closet while she was buying substances. Story 6. Managed a long-term care facility. Got a call one night from a resident telling me that the new nighttime worker was acting weird. This was about midnight and their shift started at 11. I called my lead, there were 3 people on duty, and asked how the night was going. She told me that, Sally was, sick. I put on my shoes and headed in. And having the administrator show up at almost 1 a.m. is never a good thing, so I'm pretty sure all 3 of them felt scared when I showed up. I took one look at Sally leaning against the wall and asked her to come into my office. I asked her if she'd been drinking. I never drink at work, she slurred at me. I told her I had to have her blow into this tube. We had breathalyzer tubes that registered if they were over a specific level. The crystals changed from clear to dark blue if the alcohol registered over the legal limit. No surprise, turned dark blue. I asked her again if she had been drinking. She admitted to having been drinking earlier in the evening. She and her friend had been drinking until about 10 p.m. But I'm not intoxicated. I stopped and ate almost 2 hours ago, so it's all out of my system. Nope, doesn't work that way. Sorry, Sally, but I need to let you go. Call someone to come get you. I told her as I was filling out paperwork for the breathalyzer usage and final check request. Oh, that's okay. I drove in. Nope. She then asked what time she should come in tomorrow. Sally, you no longer work here. Coming to work intoxicated is not tolerated. Oh, really? Yes, really. Please call someone who has not been drinking to come get you. She called about 16 hours later asking me for her schedule for next week. She didn't remember being at work and getting fired. Story 7. Retail, merch order was coming in, asked him to perform a specific task related to the order. I went to follow up on a few other things. I come back, he's eating Cheetos, walking around the store. I ask him how he's doing with his task, tells me he hasn't started it. I explain why it was important to do at that moment, screams me out in front of coworkers and customers. GM fired him next day due to complaints about incident. He was my best friend. He married and had a baby and all that jazz. Haven't heard from him since that day. Story 8. Guy hired to manage a store in a mall refused to park in employee parking. As I'm sure everyone knows, mall employees have designated parking places far from the choice spots near mall entrances. This guy refused to park there, and every time he parked illegally, the store got fined $100. And he parked in customer parking every dang day. He was called out on it, the policy was explained over and over, he got written up, he was told that on the next infraction he would be fired, and he did it the very next day. Was totally blindsided when we actually fired him. Story 9. I'm the assistant manager, but I just have to let the story go. I hired a cashier to help with shifts and give me days off. After about a week, the big boss and I noticed that our lottery tickets were off and one was even messed up, so obviously she has to go through our security tapes with management to find out the problem. So, a bit of backstory before the next bit. The guy's boyfriend at the time used to have my job, and back then the cameras were positioned differently. When he left, my boss had them moved to eliminate blind spots. So, when Big Boss and Bigger Boss opened up the tapes, they found this smart guy casually dropping large stacks of lottery tickets and then kicking them over to spots of the cashier area that used to be blind spots. Not only did he get caught doing this, but because of that exact positioning of where he thought the blind spot was, his boyfriend was charged too. Needless to say, he was fired immediately. Oh, and every ticket stolen is counted as a felony. Each ticket. Story 10. He stole a bunch of bananas. Seriously, it was a college dining hall. He was an employee of the dining hall and got free meals while on shift. He was not working that day, walked into the serving area, hid a bunch of bananas in his bag, and tried to pass the cashier, only paying for what was on his tray. When confronted and asked if he had forgotten anything, maybe in his bag, he denied having anything else. Fired on the spot. The worst part, he was on a meal plan, a kind of debit system, except you never get the money back at the end of the semester if you don't spend it. He had plenty of money for the semester. I have no idea why he felt the need to steal bananas. Story 11. Girl decides to start stealing some of our products from the warehouse and sell them on eBay as brand new with factory warranty. It only took a couple of weeks before we started getting calls for tech support for products with serial numbers we did not have registered as sold in the system. Brief investigation leads straight to her. She is fired, of course, and legal action pursued. But the sad angle to the story is that her father worked there too, and we were forced to make him stay at home with no pay until it could be determined beyond any doubt that he wasn't involved. Story 12. I'm not a manager, but I know of an assistant manager and an associate who got fired at my old workplace. They have a compactor that occasionally jams, and every night, about 30 minutes after close, the closing ASM opens it so everyone can dump the trash. One night, it jammed, so the ASM told an associate to climb inside and unjam it. The associate, thinking logically, because who the heck wants to pass away, right, tells the ASM no. The ASM threatened to write him up, so he went in, unjammed it, and climbed out. Then the associate spoke to the store manager about the situation, but when the manager asked if he did climb in, he told the truth, so they both had to be let go. Story 13. During my first real dev job, the company I was working for tried to implement a bunch of things to improve efficiency and employee satisfaction. Two interesting programs they implemented were work from home and agile development, along with the requisite bullpens, shared team areas. What this basically meant is that we only had to show up in the office for core hours, 4 hours, 3 days a week, and the rest of the time we could work in shared areas, restaurants, parks, home, you name it. Sometimes, if you couldn't be at core hours, you would just dial in. We were young and excited and dedicated, so the core team really got a lot of good work done with this model. About 2 weeks after we started, our Scrum Master casually mentioned, "Has anyone seen Phil?" Phil was a quiet guy, and he was still answering emails and IM, so it took us a while to agree that no one had actually seen him in a long time. She called him from the speakerphone in the bullpen, and as God is my witness, here is the call that took place. Boss. "Hey, Phil, what's up?" Phil. "Hey, boss, not much. What's up with you?" Boss. "Hey, we were just noticing we hadn't seen you much lately. Are you ever coming back in for core hours?" Phil. "Probably not." Boss. "Oh, why's that?" Phil. "Because I moved to Idaho." Boss. "But, Phil, we're in DC?" Phil. "I know." Boss. why didn't you tell us you wanted to move to Idaho? Phil, oh, because I knew you wouldn't let me. Story 14. My friend and next-door neighbor wanted to leave his IHOP job but had no backup. I decided to hire him at my own business for a couple of dollars more an hour than he was previously making. He had been falling into a deep depression, steeped in drinking, and I thought I could help him get his life back on track with a little bit of extra money. The first week was fine, but when he started to not wake up for work on time or answer his door, I was forced to go to his back door and knock on his room window to wake him up. Since the company was appointment only and we dealt with personal vehicles, being late was a big problem. I politely warned him that he couldn't do that and continue to work here. The problem persisted, and I had to let my friend and neighbor go. He is now heavily into substances and can't find a job. It's seriously the most heartbreaking thing to know that you gave a crap ton of effort to help a friend, only to have him be a crap employee. And this is why they say to never hire friends. Story 15. I had an assistant manager who would short the till every single day, $3.64. It was always the same amount, and we could never prove it was him, even though it clearly lined up with only his shifts, day or night. Until one day, he came back from lunch at Taco Bell in our parking lot, and my other assistant saw his lunch and thought to herself, that looks good, and walked across the street on her break and ordered the same thing. Her total, $3.64. She immediately came back and told me. I pulled all the drawers, and sure enough, one was short that exact amount. The kicker, when he was sat down by your DM to be terminated, all they told him was, we know what you've been stealing. And his response was, oh, you finally figured out I was stealing all those Skechers shape-ups? And for those of us that don't remember, those shoes were $130 a pair. Story 16. Late to the party, not a manager, but a specific employee comes to mind. He was hired about a half year after I was to work in the same department. As standard practice, certain benefits don't come into effect until 90 days after being hired, mostly vacation and a 401k. This guy came in and was admittedly a bit pretentious, fancied himself an MMA fighter, kept talking about how amazing he was in his social life and in the ring, and basically acted better than everyone else. I should point out this quote-unquote professional MMA fighter was thinner than me, and I don't consider myself close to fit. His work ethic, on the other hand, was a bit subpar. He was supposed to assist me in various tasks in a diffusion bay. This was in the semiconductor business, but he never did, claiming he was helping other bays. Well, as he wasn't exactly up to par, his 90-day trial was extended to 180 days. However, he kept working, even if it was barely above passing, and then 180 days later, he got his benefits, and he was made a permanent employee. Literally 5 minutes after being told, he decided to go on a half-hour bathroom break without telling anyone. When he came back, the manager asked him where he had gone. The guy told the manager he had gone to the bathroom, at which point the manager said, for half an hour? You shouldn't take bathroom breaks that long. The guy then stormed out of the building. We all thought he had quit, until he came back a week later, acting like nothing happened. When the manager told him he had been fired for having 3 no-call, no-shows, he got upset because he thought permanent employee meant cannot be fired for any reason. Methinks he took one too many hits in the head being a professional MMA fighter. Story 17. My office was facing being closed down and all staff laid off. However, the company was being very generous with retention bonuses to keep them there until their layoff date and severance packages. We started noticing 2 younger women's phones would say they were in and working, but one of them, they would switch, was never actually there when we went to look. Turns out they would clock in for each other because screw it, they were getting laid off anyway. We fired them, they lost their retention bonus up to $5,000 and got no severance or unemployment. So they screwed themselves out of several $1,000s just so they could be 20 or 30 minutes late every day. Story 18. I didn't fire him, I reported him, but upper management won't really fire anyone unless someone sees them stealing. But anyway, I worked at a grocery store and this dude that had been working for 2 days was taking all the vanilla extract off the shelf and getting intoxicated off of it. We'd find bottles in the back bathroom that only employees used. Everyone knew. He slept in the bathroom for 2 hours and still didn't get fired. He ended up quitting. His name was Phil, so we'd all call him Philly Vanilli after the fact. Story 19. One guy got mono at Christmas but was well enough to go to the party and stay all night. He then got mono again and went to the party, and by this time we told management that mono is a 1X thing despite the doctor note, and he again partied down at the holiday party then called in sick after. He was fired. He was clearly not sick and did this 2 years in a row. At the time, no Google, and it was lore mono was 1X only. He was a crap employee, and I had mono myself. No way I could have partied like he did. Another girl was constantly disappearing and she got fired after she glued her eyes shut with super glue that she claimed she thought was eyelash glue. She was applying it in the elevator, no less. Another was a manager of financial investigations. She just refused to complete files, so people would have to ask her questions, but then the answers were inconsistent. The standard was a complete file with all documentation, and we had to fire her and retrain people to get files in shape. Story 20. I'm not a manager, but I work with the manager of an IT service desk. Had a guy who was on the service desk and good at his job who looked at corn all day, every day, and just alt-tabbed it away when someone came near him. He even worked right next to a bloke who only had to turn his head to see what he was looking at, but no one ever saw him or caught him. Anyways, when the internet logs were looked at, a routine thing, he popped up as looking at corn all day, every day. So said manager guy had to walk him out on the spot. The guy literally did an excellent job, though, whilst looking at corn all day. Well, talk about multitasking, solving IT tickets and simultaneously researching the optimal corn on the cob buttering technique, you know? A true Renaissance man. Salute. Story 21. He took 2-hour lunches even if he was constantly told that lunch was only for an hour. He also manipulated the documents so that he could use the company account to go to a resort with the entire marketing team and order food, etc. to their heart's desire. No, this is not part of any incentive program at all. Apart from using the company's money for this, he also jacked up the actual value of the expenses, making the company pay even more. Also found out that he has been bringing home the product demos that our clients have been sending to us. This amounted to roughly $15,000. He tried to bypass me on signatures and decision-making. He bribed random people in my team to keep an eye on me so that he'd know what I'm up to since he thinks I'm sabotaging his career. I wasn't. I was too busy with work and was out of the country most of the time for business trips. The people that he spoke with, however, were my direct subordinates and were very loyal to me, so they told me everything. In the end, someone told HR about everything that he's done. In a single day, he was removed from his post, and the industry association was informed about his misdemeanor to make sure that he won't use the company's name for any unofficial transactions. He kept on pointing fingers at random people for getting him fired without him knowing that it's me, his boss, who did it. Story 22. Not a manager, but someone was recently fired from my job for something so stupid it probably inspired a few dozen face palms. I work at a retail store of a very well-known technology company. Customers very often trade in their old smartphones for credit when they buy a new one. Protocol is to erase the old phone in the customer's presence. One employee didn't erase the phone, went through the camera roll, found some pictures he liked, the customer was female, and emailed them to himself using the customer's email account that was logged into the phone. The customer found the emails in her sent box and complained to management. He has several levels of fired. Story 23. Not really a firing, but I had a crazy dude interview for a job which requires an editorial skills test. Small company, no real HR department, so us managers had to do all the screening and everything ourselves. This dude showed up for the interview in a sweatshirt and jeans. He jumped up twice while I was trying to talk to him and ran outside the building without explanation, then came back in. I thought I was being punked. Finally comes test time. I had to explain it to him like 5 times. He had 45 minutes to complete the 4 pages. He did not get through half a page in the time limit, gave me a hard time about needing more time, but finally left. Within an hour or so after leaving, he started calling me incessantly. Did I get the job? Did I get the job? I had a stack of tests to check, so didn't have an answer for him immediately, which ramped up the call frequency. I started screening all my calls. After I checked his test, I emailed and told him he failed, and he was no longer in consideration for the job. He immediately called and started yelling at me on the phone. I hung up on him. He kept calling back, but I refused to pick up again. Then he started pestering me by email. He didn't believe he had failed. He wanted to see other people's tests to compare. He thought it was rigged. He thought I was out to get him. I finally had to have one of the male bosses call him and threaten him with legal action before he stopped pestering me. I made people walk me to my car for a few weeks. I was convinced he'd come back. Crazy. And if you're learning a thing or two from this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 24. Not the manager, but we had a young girl start in the deli counter at the supermarket I worked in. Her family was Lebanese, and the very first day, the girl's mother was just hanging around the counter watching everything. After a while, the deli manager asked if she's okay. She said that she was just there to make sure her daughter is okay. The deli manager politely tells her that she'll be fine and she can go home, but the mother refuses. After a little while longer, the deli manager insists that she go home because she doesn't appreciate being watched as she does her job and interacts with the new girl. The woman still refuses. The deli manager then gives her an ultimatum: go home now, or you can take your daughter with you. That was the girl's first and last day at the supermarket. Story 25. This guy was a walk-in screw-up, just stupid crap. Jailbroke his work-issued phone, then installed crap that made it not function quite right for his job function. Switched the SIM to his personal Android with permission, which he then proceeded to run custom-baked ROMs, switching them on a daily basis. When coming to work, I can't hear calls today. This ROM broke the ringer, but damn, this thing over here is faster. Then another day, I can't use speaker while troubleshooting because of this ROM mod, but let me spend 5 minutes telling you about the extra 2 millihertz I'm getting from the CPU now. Sadly, this was all minor stuff in comparison. The final straw was when he got sent to a client site where a system controlled their gates. He used the master test card to open a gate he didn't have authorization to use, drove through into an active mine site, through to a staff parking only section, and proceeded to park in the marked ambulance bay because it was close to where he was going. Then he got banned from the site. Then he drove to the next site, went the wrong way through a one-way loop, and parked in the middle of the road because it's close to where I'm going. When confronted by the service manager, he argued that he was going to be quick, got banned from the site, got fired for getting banned from 2 of our biggest client sites in the space of a few hours. Story 26. It was the 90s. I still had hair. I was working as an assistant manager at a Natural Wonders store in the mall. The company no longer exists, as with every retail job I've held. We hired high school students almost exclusively. It was a typical low-paying after-school retail mall job. There was one girl who was always late, routinely failed to get the most simple task done, and sulked whenever I called her on the behavior. She switched shifts with another girl and was scheduled to work the Thursday 4 to close shift. The shift comes up and she hasn't shown. Finally, after she's 30 minutes late, I call her at home. Me: hi, Susie, you're late for your shift. Are you going to make it in? Her: I really want to finish watching this episode of Jerry Springer. Me: okay, I hope it's a good episode, but we are going to have to let you go. Her: what? But why? Me: are you comfortable with us sending your check in the mail? Her, really quiet: okay. I've never actually said the phrase, you're fired, but I have been the person who has done most of the termination of employment. Story 27. I owned a small auto electric business and I just hired a young guy to clean and prep alternator and starter components in the back of the shop for assembly in the front. We were getting slammed with customers. Parts were going in the back, but nothing was coming out. I look in the back, no kid. I searched throughout the shop and outside, no kid. Then across a busy 6-lane road that ran in front of the shop, I see the kid talking to someone who was washing a Dune buggy. By the time the kid made it back to the shop, like 45 minutes later, I had his personal effects waiting for him at the counter with a pink slip on top. I didn't have the pleasure of actually firing him. I was too busy in the back doing his job. My office manager paid him his 20 minutes from petty cash. Story 28. One of my employees broke into my locked office with a customer and went through the cabinet with all of the employee files. Said files contained contracts, personal info like SSNs, and a picture of the employee in uniform for our records. When I went through the footage with audio to find out why my office was unlocked, I heard him talking to the female customer about how one of our other employees was a great guy and she should actually totally fool around with him. The reason he broke into the cabinet with all the sensitive info was to find the employee pictures, because the guy wasn't on Facebook and the female customer wanted to see what he looked like before she made a decision about fooling around with him. Story 29. I'm a nurse. I used to take care of children with traumatic brain injuries and other severe cognitive disabilities. One such child was on a ventilator at night to provide some amount of daily support, but she would come off of the vent in the morning. Only the nurses touched the ventilators. Techs and nursing assistants were not trained to do so. However, I worked with one particular CNA who was really spaced out all the time and thought that she was going to be helpful. I would remove this particular child's vent every morning. The important thing to know is that when a ventilator is covering your airway, that's great when it's on, as in powered up and giving breaths. It does its job well. However, this morning I removed the ventilator and powered the system down. My pager went off, so I rushed out of the room, figuring I'd come back after to properly put the vent tubing back with the vent away from the bed. I handled the paged issue and went to the nurse's desk to get something, and here comes Space Cadet CNA, all proud of herself. She was like, oh hey, I put so-and-so vent back on, so she's all set. All content and carefree, knowing she was taking care of business, working well out of her scope of practice. I almost crapped my scrubs. I'd been out of that room for several minutes, long enough for the poor patient with the ventilator that was powered down and occluding her airway to suffocate. I gave the CNA a perplexed and panicked look and ran into the patient's room. She was not a pretty color and was breathing through the whole circuit, like breathing through a 2-foot hose attached to a toaster at the end. So, long story short, there were some manual breaths and lots of O2 provided to get the poor kid back without any damage, luckily. The CNA was fired. Story 30. I worked at this Japanese restaurant that basically had a new cashier every week because either people would quit because they couldn't handle one of the owners or they got fired. These are the stupidest and most memorable. One guy got fired for selling grass. Stupidest part of that is he did it in this one hallway that was away from the customers, but had a camera pointed directly in the area, so there was video evidence of what he was doing. Another guy got hired to work as a cook and showed up intoxicated the very first day. I had to pick him up from the bus stop and saw him finishing a Budweiser tall boy, but I thought maybe it was just one. He definitely had more. He almost set fire to the kitchen. He was so wasted. I ended up giving him a ride back to the bus station, which was incredibly awkward. Then there was this delivery driver that tried to change the tip on his delivery. It was so obvious, but we still ended up calling the customer to confirm what they had tipped, and we were right. Story 31. Worked for a major appliance manufacturer. If I mentioned the name, you'd know it immediately. One day, on the machine/process that made bare metal cooktops into shiny black cooktops, there was a woman tasked with taking the cooktops off the wash line, where oil from the forming process was washed off, and placing them on the application line where the powder was applied. This woman was a devastatingly cute redhead. She came to me, pale in the face, paler than normal anyway, to tell me a certain individual had informed her that he wasn't wearing anything under his Tyvek, a paper suit used to keep the enamel from another process off your clothes. I talked to the guy, and he says yes, he told her that while he laughed. He's been a problem before, and we have to walk him out. Then I had to go back to the prep room where I had to get his clothes. He really wasn't wearing anything under his Tyvek. Ugh. Story 32. Fresh out of college, I worked in a call center for a mutual fund company. Job wasn't terribly hard, just placed trades all day and occasionally had to deal with a schmuck here and there. An older guy who sat around the corner from me was kind of sad looking and hated being there. He would put customers on mute and say words under his breath from time to time. Well, one day, he had an older lady call in to place a trade to cash, and she wasn't very pleasant. He hit his mute button, but the phone didn't mute. He proceeded to call her an old, nasty witch until she interrupted him and said, "Excuse me?" To the old guy's surprise, he asked her what she was talking about and said she was hearing things. She hung up and the call escalated. His boss pulled the call and pulled him aside. He was told to just be honest and he wouldn't be fired. Instead of coming clean, he kept denying it and the call was played back to him. Security walked him out right from the conference room. I'll never forget a Caesar salad sitting on his desk for the last 5 hours of the day. Rumor has it they put the salad in his box of belongings and mailed it to his home address, but I like to think it's still sitting on that desk as a reminder. Story 33. I still remember the first guy I ever had to fire, and I wasn't even that much older than him. He was some stupid kid hired straight out of college. A few flags during training, kept telling him if he had any questions about anything, he could feel free to ask. He never asked anything. Told him to clean up a lap, but don't throw away that binder of notes. Told him that very clearly and made him repeat it. I leave for an hour, come back, and he's thrown it away. When asked why, he said it was old notes, so it didn't seem useful. You little crap, you don't have enough experience or authority to decide what is useful or not. I made him go out to the dumpster and dive in to get it out. Turns out there was important info in there. This wasn't the last straw. Last straw was asking him to test a few parts, get them cleared by Q&A, and take those parts directly to shipping with a COC. 3-step direction, pretty simple, right? We'd supervised him doing it before a few times and he seemed to get it. He managed the first two, then somehow brought down the wrong box of parts with the right certificate of conformance. How does that even happen? To be shipped out, and we didn't catch it until it was too late. And that was pretty bad. It was really bad. But when we asked what happened and if he made a mistake, he kept denying it. I told him there were only 2 people in the office who regularly tested those parts, and it was either him or the other girl, who I know was meticulous as heck, and she wasn't testing it for the last few weeks. Since I wanted him to learn how to do it, he tried to pin it on the girl. Like, if he'd at least been honest and apologized, I don't know, maybe I would have given him a second chance. But this guy kept denying it, saying it wasn't him, when basically everyone knew it was him. Even the guys at shipping had a record of him coming down, and the girl's weekly report had noted that she wasn't doing testing that week. A guy who can't listen to direction, screw up, and won't admit it, and tries to pin his mistakes on his coworker is a schmuck. If he'd shown any remorse or tried to improve himself at any point, I wouldn't have minded as much. Story 34. I had a kid who worked the front counter in my shop who was perhaps the densest kid I have ever seen. I had to speak to him several times because his default position was to stand behind the register and stare into space. Even when there were customers waiting to order, One day, while opening, I asked him to go over the opening checklist and make sure everything was done. I went about my business, but 5 minutes later, I looked over at him and he's still staring at the checklist. He looks up at me, nods and says, "Looks good to me." When I asked if he was sure everything was done, he pointed to the list and showed me where things were checked off. I sat and explained to him that those check marks had been made weeks before and didn't mean those tasks had been completed today. I had to handhold him through the whole list. Later on that day, I asked him to check on the drink cooler to make sure it was stocked. He literally leaned out over from the counter, looked at the cooler, then back at me and nodded, "Looks good." Story 35. A friend of mine brought me his buddy who had a hard luck story. He was laid off after 20 years at the same company, had a wife, kids, mortgage, all of that. He made a major appeal to my sympathy and I offered him an opportunity to do sales for my company. This was about 1997 and computers and the internet were just getting really hot. We did clones, software, LANs, and we had a small dial-up ISP going. But he didn't know much about technology, so we trained him and gave him the tools he needed to go cold calling for new corporate networking clients. We didn't expect much and we didn't get much, so I started to become a little less patient. When I talked to him and tried to analyze his sales efforts, he became very defensive. So I set up a daily schedule and helped him to plan his work so I could get a better idea of exactly what and when he was doing. After a couple of weeks, I took a different route to the mailbox in the morning and discovered that the guy was just parking on the far side of our building and sleeping in his car. Decided to make sure this wasn't a wild exception, so I observed for 3 days running, and every time the guy was asleep in his car. When I asked him for sales updates, all he was giving me was lies, so sayonara. Story 36. Not a manager, but the CEO of a mid-sized, close-knit digital marketing firm. A couple of days ago, I actually fired a social media intern who I was acquainted with through my girlfriend. Mental image, petite hipster, absolute worst tattoos you've ever seen, and looks exactly like Twiggy. Our biz, fun as heck, lots of freedom and autonomy based on mutual respect. Never had issues with anyone before. Anywho, this employee who was always very friendly to me in social situations and had actually just invited me to her boyfriend's birthday party, turns out to be a super hot mess. Her partying, think aggressive high schooler constantly goading everyone to get riggedy-wrecked, son, led her to spend an evening intoxicatedly ranting to my girlfriend about various minor issues with the company. The internet went out, the main room was too cold, her intern wage wasn't high enough. She topped it off by 1, telling my GF that she should break up with me, and 2, that she was going to just stop showing up to work and keep billing us because she was too important to waste her time in such a lowly position. My GF said that she tried to calm her down and steer her foot away from her mouth to no avail. At that point, Twiggy got kicked out of the restaurant they were having drinks at for being too intoxicated. After my lady recounted this later on that same night, I followed a hunch and reviewed the invoices for each pay period, where Twiggy was supposed to explain her tasks and list her hours for each payroll period. Turns out she was reporting 2 to 3 times as many hours as she was actually working, maybe an extra $400 a dough. The next day, she no-called, no-showed, and I sent her a terse email terminating her employment with us. Our mutual friends were completely surprised by this. Moral of the story, don't get wasted and complain to the boss's girlfriend about the boss when you're lying on your invoices. Story 37. Heard this from a cop. Newbie was sent to the cell area to give the prisoners their meal before court. He knocked on the cell door and waited for them to open it from the inside. I know he did loads of other stupid stuff too, but I can't remember them all. He resigned after about a month. My hubby's bro is a head chef, and he had one guy who kept sending out goat cheese salad without goat cheese. He was asked to make vegetable soup, was given the recipe. He peeled all the vegetables when prepping and kept the peels and the freshly peeled veg went in the bin. Then he tried to blend the peels and use them for the soup. Then he disappeared for 3 hours, and they found him out the back of his face on substance. Story 38. Many dumb things on the clock, but this happened on the guy's day off. I'm the manager of a movie theater. One of my employees came up on his day off to watch Transformers: Age of Extinction. It was premiere night, so right in the center of our lobby, we had a giant standee. You know those large cardboard advertisements that people take pictures in front of? Of Optimus Prime on a T-Rex Dinobot holding a sword. It looked really cool, actually. One of my employees must have thought so as well, because after he watched his movie, he came into the lobby, climbed the T-Rex, and tried to steal Optimus Prime's sword. Since this was a sold-out theater of 500 and it was ending, the lobby was packed full of people standing around, watching him try and fail to detach a cardboard sword. He was fired right there in under a minute. And I mean, he signed his dismissal papers and a form for some of the truly bad ex-employees banning them from the theater indefinitely right there in front of hundreds of strangers and ex-coworkers. The amount of people who called him an idiot and mocked him was astounding. Story 39. I had an employee at a shoe store in a mall who had a few issues, but the one we were working on the most and for which she had been written up was that her family kept coming to visit her at work. Her children would climb all over the fixtures and she and her husband would ignore them. She would always greet a customer who would walk in, but then she'd go right back to talking to her husband. She didn't attempt to sell them shoes, her job, and they wouldn't interrupt her to ask for help. So she gets a final written warning and I try to explain to her how her actions are hurting sales, etc. We make a rule that her family can't be in the store, but she can visit them in the mall during her 15-minute breaks. She apologizes, and I think I've gotten through to her. But one day I'm at home and I get a call from another employee to tell me that not only is her family in the store, but they spread out a blanket on the sales floor and were having a picnic. I technically didn't get to fire her because she realized what was happening and quit before I said the words, and she threw her keys in my face. Story 40. I ran a delivery sub shop and fired people for many crazy reasons. I could go on and on with outrageous stories. The silliest one was when one of my delivery drivers got dropped off to work. When I asked her why she didn't have a car to take deliveries, she didn't see why it was even an issue. Okay, just go ahead and walk back home then. Bye, Felicia. Then there was this guy selling substances on his deliveries. Like, come on, dude. The best story is actually about a lady, twice my age, who quit because I wrote her up. She missed a shift, and normally that's automatic termination, but I decided I'd let her catch a break. Honestly, I just felt bad for her. But the next day, she came in, she started screaming and demanding an apology for disrespecting her. And when I denied my need to apologize, she ripped off her shirt, threw it in my face, and stormed out to the bus station to wait for a ride home. Like, what? She rode the bus to work so she could quit and ride it back home? Every day was an adventure at that job, that's for dang sure. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.